We almost had a reprieve. Oh, I did. Neil was going to take the service. He's flying back to see his dad. And Dennis rang me and said, would it upset you if Neil took the service? I said, not on your life. But then he rang back again and said, oh no, it's might have jet lag, and so back to me again. Well, as you can see, I'm going to conduct a history lesson. Now I know my wife said, oh, when did that, they get confused. When was this, when would that happen, and when? And so if she's confused, others may be too. So I want to cover the Bible history from creation, down here, to the last of the disciples, the writing of Revelation. Covers about 4,000 years, and so we want to get back in time for lunch, so let's get started. Now the horizontal line here is just a timeline. It's just marked off with, it's not in any sequence or anything like, it's in a sequence, but it's not in scale. It's not to scale. And it's just the things that happened along the way. Do I? Oh, okay. Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. That's better. Let go.
Yeah.
Did we lose one, didn't we? Good, thanks, Renee. All right, we know about creation. We know about Adam and Eve created here. And it says in Revelation 3, in Genesis 3, and verse 4, Genesis 1:26 is better. Better start off in the right place. And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and the fowl of the air, over the cattle, and all the earth, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God created he him, male and female created he them. Well now, I don't know how long that lasted before sin came in, but not very long, I shouldn't think. And we have the sad events of sin coming in Genesis 3, verses 4 to 6. And the woman said, and the serpent said unto the woman, ye shall not surely die. For God doth know in that day that ye eat thereof, your eyes shall be opened, and you shall become as gods, knowing good and evil. Well, they certainly did find out about good and evil. They found about evil and about the sorrow it brings. And that's been the sorry state ever since. It's continuing all along these ups and downs and the things that happened. Now the next event, next thing I want to show you is actually and you've seen it before, I've had it before, is Adam and his descendants. Yes, right. Thank you. That's it, right. Now, can you see that down here? Now, there's an interesting thing. That is to scale. From day one here, from naught here, that's to scale, and their lives are to scale. And you can see that notice that the length of life shortened markedly, as particularly after the flood. You see that there are 3 people there to cover the first 2,150 years of Earth's history. Now, it's only a short time. You see, if you take Adam and you take Lamech here, and you take Seth, Shem, rather. Take Shem. They overlap. Now, I've also noticed too that you could have had Abram was alive when Shem was alive. You see that? It's Abram born down here. He's alive just. Now they'll live together. And if you take this, so that's his Abram, his father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather, so great-great-great-great-great-grandfather could have bounced Abram on his knee when he was a child. Not the Bible doesn't say he did. Doesn't say he didn't either, but he was alive at the same time, and it could have passed the knowledge on to Abraham of the flood, what the world was like, and how things happened back there. Notice also that when Methuselah died, the flood came, and that came and we notice too that 1,656 years after the creation, the flood came, and in Genesis 6, verse 1, and it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, that daughters were born unto them, and the sons of God saw the daughters of men were fair, and they took them for wives, for all that they chose. And the Lord said, My spirit shall not always strive with man, for he is also flesh, yet his days shall be 120 years. And it goes on to say in Genesis 7, verse 11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, on the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were the fountains of the deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. Now that tells me something. This genealogy is repeated in Chronicles, also in Luke. And why would it be like that? Why do you think it had father to son, all down those years, and the flood came gives the month, the day when it happened, the year, month and day when it happened. You can work it out. So that would indicate that God wanted us to remember those events, and he made certain that they be remembered. So the flood came on time and destroyed the earth that then was. Now the next sort of event is, we come to the Bible books of Abraham. And in Genesis 12, verses 1 and 2, it said, Now the Lord said to Abraham, Get thee out of thy country and from thy kindred and from thy father's house unto a land that I will show thee, and I will make of thee a great nation, and I will bless thee and make thy name great, and thou shalt be a blessing. Well, now he had to wait quite a while for that. He was 100 years old when Isaac was born. And but make a great nation, that didn't seem possible. And anyway, eventually, read in Genesis 21, verses 1 to 3. And the Lord visited Sarah as he had said, and the Lord did unto Sarah as he had spoken. And Sarah conceived and bare Abram a son in his old age, at the set time of which God had spoken to him. And Abram called the name of his son that was born unto him, whom Sarah bare, his name is Isaac. All right, so we get down to Isaac, and we have the child of promise born. Now the next event would be the move to Egypt. Now in Genesis 46 and verse 26, it said, and all the souls that came with Jacob to Egypt, which came out of his loins beside Jacob's sons' wives, all the souls were 76. But I think it says 70 souls went down into the kingdom, doesn't it say 70 souls went down into Egypt? Well, if you count... Verse 27. Yeah. And of course it includes the sons of Joseph in there. And there were 70. 70 people went down into Egypt. And we immediately think of Egypt and we say, oh, well, they were persecuted there and they were, they had a hard life. But is that really true? Did they have a hard life? They didn't. Not initially, anyway. They were given the best land. They were given a choice. And Egypt was an incubator for these children of Israel. That 70 people just multiplied. And they just grew and grew and grew until Pharaoh said they swarm over the place. We'll be outnumbered. If something happens, we'll be outnumbered. And so that was in 430 years, they just multiplied from 70 to a couple of million. And we find that the next event was, let me just put this up, the sons of Jacob. There. Now, if you read about them, you'll find that they're a mixed bunch. Well, they were from 4 different mothers and had lots of different characteristics. And when he came, Jacob came to die, he came and he sort of read their characters. Reuben was reckless. You can imagine what he's like. Simeon and Levi, they were violent. Remember, it was Simeon that wanted to kill Joseph. They must have had a violent nature. Judah is a lion. Dan is a serpent. I don't like snakes. And he must have been a bit of a snake. He must have been sort of, a bit of underhand sort of a fellow. Naphtali was a doe. Quite, you think of someone quiet and peaceful and relaxed. Gad was a raider. Asher was rich food. I think of Asher as maybe a little bit oversized, a little bit plump. He's sort of showing his waistline. And Ishkar a donkey. Oh, that's good or bad. Zebulun the ships. Joseph was fruitful and Benjamin a wolf. So these are the characteristics of these people they had, and they were read in there. All right, so after they left, they came out of Egypt in the Exodus. Let's just turn to Genesis, Exodus 12:36. And the Lord gave people favour in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they lent them such things as they required, and they spoiled the Egyptians. and journeyed from Ramesses to Succoth, about 600,000 on foot. That were men besides children. You know, he had 600,000 soldiers. That's that's some troop of people. Imagine Moses trying to manage all this. With all the some of these characteristics in their genes. No wonder he had a hard time. And I've covered it all up, but there's the giving of the law was there, and so they came out of Egypt, and the commandments given, and then we come to the period of the judges. Now the judges were just people who usually conquered someone or did something brave or thing. I'll put up a list of the judges. This was a time of when people did what was right in their own eyes. I'll pop it up here. There. Now I've put in brackets the time that they judged the people. You see Othniel. Now Ehud, you know about him. He was a left-handed fellow. Shemgar, Deborah. Gideon, you know about Gideon. He's 300 warriors. Tola, you don't know much about him. Jehoshaphat, Jephthah. And you come down to the last one, you know about him, Samson. Now all the other time, now that was a period of some 300 years almost. And you say, well, that doesn't add up to 300. Well, that's the time they were in bondage, because they'd be faithful for a little while the judge was there and encourage them or setting an example. And then they'd slip back into heathenism again, and another judge would be conquered, and another judge would come along, and they'd be so up and down it went. Now it was during this period that the Ruth, you get the story of Ruth, was in this period. And in Judges 21, I'll get over there, Joshua Judges. It says, and in those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. You can imagine the confusion, that was going on there. Well, the first king of Israel, you know about him. I think we've covered him up. Just after the period of the judges, you have Saul becomes king around the 1051 BC. And come over to Samuel 10 and verse 1. Then Samuel took a vial of oil and poured it upon his head and kissed him and said, is it not because the Lord hath anointed thee to be captain over his inheritance? What a privilege Saul had. But unfortunately, it didn't do him much good. He didn't follow through with what he was taught, what he believed. And so we have another king, King David. In 2 Samuel 2 and verse 4, and the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the house of Judah. And they told David, saying that the men of Jabesh Gilead were they that buried Saul. So here's the king, first over his own tribe, Judah, and then over the whole of Israel. And there we have Solomon, King Solomon, and the troubles he went through. And then we have the kingdom divided. Remember Solomon's son, Jeroboam. Remember he took some wrong advice. Yeah, instead of asking what the older men said, like ease the burdens, ease the tax burden. No, make it harder. Why he took that advice, I'll never know. But the people said, well, let's pay every man to his tent, let's get out of here. And so the 10 tribes, they left and the kingdom was divided. And you had the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Now the kingdom of Israel lasted about 200 years. And let's turn to 2 Kings 17:21. For he rent Israel from the house of David, and they made Jeroboam the son of Nebat king, and Jeroboam drove Israel from following the Lord and made them sin, a great sin. Well, one thing about these, I'll put up a list of the kings of the northern kingdom. Kings of Israel, there we go. Thank you, Renee. Now you can see down, oops, what happened there? I think I missed it. Now there's a list of them, and it's like a pin-up of none of them any good. None followed God. There wasn't one. You can see some names there that you know. You can see Ahab, Jehu, over him, Joash, Jehoshaphat, and eventually they were taken away by the Syrians, and they were dispersed, and you couldn't tell. And they took them away as captives, dispersed among other nations, brought other people in. And that's why the Jews didn't like the Samaritans at all, because they were mixed up breed who didn't know God. Well, Judah wasn't much better. That's it. Now you see some with a circle there and a number beside them. They are the good kings. They did have 8 good ones. Where's it gone? They did have eight good kings, and you have Jehoshaphat, and let's read them all down there: Uzziah, Jotham, Hezekiah and Josiah. And finally ending up with Zedekiah was there, and remember the Babylonians took him captive and put out his eyes and killed his children. And, well, a very sad affair. Now, in that period too, you have Jeremiah, and you have Daniel, and then you have Daniel's birth there, and then you have the 70 years in exile, how that they were there. And the thing that amazes me about that is nobody came into the country and took it over. It was just left there. It was like they left it when they get back. You know, it was a wilderness. They needed things, but it wasn't. Nobody owned it. And the rebuilding of the temple in the time of Ezra, in Ezra 6, and verse 15. And the house was finished on the 3rd day of the month of Adar, which was in the 6th year of the reign of Darius the king. Once again, the Bible's very clear, isn't it? It gives you the time of the flood, gives you the time things happen, and it gives you the time of the rebuilding of the temple, the exact month, day and year. And it can all be calculated. Remember the people weeping out of the temple? Some were happy and some were sad. The older ones were sad because they saw remember the glory of the former temple, and the other one was nowhere near as good. Now then, there's a 400-year lull. There's nothing takes place. Well, plenty took place, but it's not recorded. There's no recorded history of it until we come to the time in Matthew, then the birth of Jesus. Now, all this from creation or after sin was trying to bring us to the birth of Jesus, and God had a problem in actually maintaining the people and the kingdom and together so that they could be brought forth and fulfill the predictions that were made. And let's look at Galatians 4:4. But when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of woman, made under the law. You know, Jesus arrived on time. He arrived right on time. And remember that when the wise men came to visit Jesus, they didn't go back to tell Herod where he was or what they'd found. But the Jewish elders soon found out where he was born, when he was born. They knew all about it. They looked up the prophecies and they could tell straight away. And they looked up the prophecy in Isaiah. Isaiah 7 and verse 14. Therefore the Lord himself shall give you a sign. Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son and call his name Emmanuel. You know, there'd be no sign, just normal married woman giving birth to a child. There'd be no sign at all, would it? It happens all the time. But a virgin to conceive is something special, something different. And you notice when Jesus was put on the cross, they put a sign up saying, "This is the King of the Jews." But they did it in languages of the day. They did it in 3 different languages. In Luke 23, I'll find it. Verse 38. And a superscription also was written over him in the letters of Greek and Latin and Hebrew. This is the King of the Jews. Well, he was making sure that they all knew about it, and He certainly was the King of the Jews. It all pointed towards that event about Jesus. And then, of course, we know that the end of the Jewish dispensation was in AD 70 when they destroyed the temple, and it was gone forever. And so all down the flow of history we've seen that from creation all the way down there's been ups and downs, trials. We've read stories in our scriptures about to give us hope. God has not left us without hope. And in the New Testament, down at the very end, he left us I'll just put this up here, the books of the Bible are written. Now this is probably a little bit interesting in Sabbath school. You'll see there that there's books written on after Paul's letters there, after the first, second and third missionary journeys. And then you see the last lot there is written in Rome. And you see the Gospels, a little bit difficult to find out exactly when they're written. But all written round the 50 AD mark. Around there. And then the book of Revelation is written right at the very last about, and the letters of John, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, written probably while Paul was on Patmos, we studied about this morning in the lesson. And so all that brings us down to the close. Well, that's, as they say, that's history. But what's the takeaway from all this history of Judah and Israel? What do you actually get from it? Just the stories? Just the things that bad things happen, or the good things? The working of God, or whatever? One of the things that take is that just a remnant shall be saved. Not the majority. In Isaiah 10 it talks about just a remnant. Isaiah 10 verse 21. The remnant shall return, even a remnant of Jacob, unto the mighty God. Only a remnant. There's always been a remnant. There was a remnant saved in the flood. There was a remnant, well, more than the remnant came out of Egypt. There was a remnant after they were dispersed. After 70 years exile, there was just a remnant. And all down through the ages, there's just been a remnant come out. As Stephen, as Christ had been promised, but when he came, they crucified him. They had all this history right down there. They could look back on it. They could go through it. But they were dead against him. They did it so much so that they crucified him. As Stephen, his trial emphasised is people killing the prophets. He said, which one of the prophets haven't you killed? And of course that stung them. And what about us? Are we believing God's messengers? Do we follow God's prophet? Or do we just don't ignore it, don't worry about it? We go on our way regardless. So the lesson from this is to learn from this. This is written for what our example, isn't it? And our learning. If we learn from the history, what happened back here, all the way through, God was with the people that were faithful. God blessed the people that were faithful. and God saved the people that were faithful. And the others, they just went their way. So that's a sad story of history all the way through. It's really, in many ways, a very sad story as you go through. To think what could have been and what actually happened. And so that's what we want to encourage you to go look on the bright side, that if we're faithful, if we follow what God says, He will save us at last. All right, I think it's time to come to sing. I think we're back in time for, after 4,000 years, we're back. Let us close by singing our final hymn, number 518, Standing on the Promises. They are mighty promises of God too. Standing on the promises of Christ my King, in eternal ages let His praises ring. Glory in the highest and sing, standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of God, my Saviour, standing. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of God not fail. Hear us sail by the living word of God. I shall prevail. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of God, my Saviour, standing. I'm standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of God, King, bound to Him eternally by love's strong cause, overcoming death. Standing on the promises of God. Standing on the promises of God, my Saviour, standing. I'm standing on the promises of God. Our Heavenly Father, we thank You again this morning for being with us. We thank You for providing a means of salvation for us. We thank Thee that Jesus did come and that You're able to preserve a line, a godly line to follow, to bring Him through. We're thankful too that You can be with each bowed head here. Grant them a blessing as they go through the week. Help them to appreciate all that You do for them. And we thank You again in Jesus' name. Amen.